And for news from further afield, African heads of state have recounted how economic development will not succeed without the help needed for poorer countries. Day 2 of the Economic Development Assembly in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, saw World Bank head Ajay Banga and various business leaders thrashing out ways to help Africa's poorest countries out of the rut. Xolani Mbanjwa is there, and he asked former Transnet CEO and Ubu Investment Holdings chairperson Portia Derby about her views on Banga's address, that Africa is missing out on benefits of having the youngest population in the world by failing to invest in the youth.
If you take the fact that at 1.2 billion young people in Africa, if we don't make sure that we have investments in infrastructure and education and health, there won't be a dividend at the end of the day. We would have been a failing. Otherwise, if we do invest properly in them, we've got 100 years of growth. And so we have the possibility for Africa, actually, to be the next phase, to be the next growth driver in the world, which is really very exciting as a possibility.
And many people are skeptical about Africa becoming that driver of actual growth. But when it comes to also what we heard about the IDA, the World Bank IDA, which actually lends money to the world's 77 poorest countries, 44 of them are found on the African continent. So this particular Economic Development Assembly is crucial to make sure that those poorest countries actually get the support they deserve. But what was also interesting is that the World Bank is in support of this particular drive to actually support poorer communities.
I have to say, I'm not known to be a fan of the World Bank, but I definitely am impressed with this new president of the World Bank. His agenda is spot on. And so for me, the participation here, and for all of us in Africa actually, we need to make sure that the next round of the IDA lending is enough for it to be able to do the investments that it has targeted for Africa. The connecting 300 million Africans who've never had electricity, we have to back that because it's the only way that we're able to generate growth going forward.
And this is also about what is something that's important. South Africa, as the most industrialized economy, can no longer sit on the sidelines while it is surrounded or it is neighbors to countries that are poor. What are the ramifications of that, where we are inward looking and not helping those who are much less fortunate than us? Eventually, aren't they going to drag the rest down to their level if we are not helping them develop?
So recently, we've been doing work at Ubu, and we found data that was put together by Standard Bank in 2016 that split South African GDP between black people and white people. Well, I'm afraid to say, when I saw this workshop, I thought, well, it's a relevance to me, because when you look at the GDP per capita for black people in South Africa, we're actually just south of $1,500 US. The IDA is borrowing to countries from this year at $1,300. So we're south of that. So actually, if you were to take the second economy that Mbeki spoke about many years ago, where black people locate themselves, and we are all living in former homelands, in the second economy, in rural areas, actually, we should be having this conversation internally in South Africa. IDA does two things. It gives 30% thereabout of the money as a grant. We see it every day as we work in rural communities, is that you need a lot of money, and especially in rural communities, you are in those category B2 municipalities where there aren't enough skills, is that the communities, basically rural areas, are left on their own. So if we had money, grant funding that enabled the communities in partnership with whoever they choose as partners to do feasibility studies for infrastructure, and on the back of that to be able to apply for money, you would see investment happening in South Africa. So for me, what was exciting was actually, when you look at South Africa, there are parts of us which are outside of the IDA club, and I hope from a solidarity point of view, South Africa does participate in the fundraising round, but also just from the perspective of us in South Africa, we really need to start thinking a lot harder around how we engage civil society and communities to drive their own development. Because actually, shame, if we wait for government, we'll be waiting for quite a long time.
Food for thought indeed there. Thank you very much. Portia Derby is the chairperson of Ubu Investment Holdings. A lot to talk about here at the Economic Development Assembly, where the world here is meeting to say to the wealthiest nations in the world, they should live up to their promise of funding the World Bank IDA to support the poorest countries, a majority of whom are found here on the African continent. For Newzroom Afrika on Channel 405, I'm Xolani Mbanjwa in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire.